Adam, are you ready? Adam Lang. Thank you.
We don't have a clicker, but if you do, just do the right button.
Sure. No clicker. Nobody brought a clicker. Hackathon. Hello, my name is Adam Lang. I'm the Head of Communications and Policy at Shelter Scotland, which I suppose broadly means that all the fantastic work that my colleagues in the digital team, of which Conrad leads, I get to have some modicum of saying, that was all part of my plan. I did that. I'm genuinely really excited to be here. Most of the conferences and events that I attend are not this interesting, to say the least. So I'm really chuffed to be here. Thank you for inviting me along. There is throughout the room here, and I believe throughout the weekend, there's an abundance of sort of statistical information about the challenge and the scale of the problem of homelessness and bad housing in Scotland. So I've tried to gear my presentation, and I do tend to ramble a bit, so just throw things at me, away from the stuff that's already here, to give you a bit of an oversight about Shelter Scotland and how we perceive our take on some of the harder stats that are scattered around the room here. Oh, good start. Very briefly then, just a very quick bit of context setting in terms of who we are. We've been around since 1968. Our sort of sister organisation, Shelter, was formed in 1966 in England. Shelter Scotland specifically and distinctly was set up in 1968 because there's a whole lot of differences both in the legislation and in the local challenges about the housing market in Scotland as compared to England. The quote that's up there is taken from our original legal founding principles, our charitable objectives, and I put them up deliberately because I think they're amazing, and I think more people should write like that generally. But we were created to play a creative part in the life of the nation by relieving human suffering, irrespective of colour, creed, or class, and to relieve hardship and distress among homeless people and among those in need living in adverse housing conditions. I think that is a fantastic mission statement for any organisation. It's one that I'm incredibly proud to work for and towards at Shelter Scotland. Thank you. I didn't write it. I wish I did write it. I didn't write that. A lot of people don't necessarily understand the way Shelter Scotland's structured or what we do. We do this sort of tracking thing annually about what people believe we do, and 90% of people we survey think that we run soup kitchens or do actually build or provide sheltered housing. We actually do neither of those things. We provide fantastic frontline services and support and advice for people who are homeless or badly housed. And the way we conceptualise that is helping people here today in housing need. And the other side of what we do, the bit that I'm responsible for, is we campaign for change so that the problems people face today are improved tomorrow. And I'll go on just to sort of explain a little bit about that. But it isn't actually what a lot of people think that we do. And we have lots of internal discussions about how far we should go in correcting those perceptions. We're broadly split into three core functions. We have a services division. Some of my colleagues from services are here. They do incredible work dealing every day with people who are at the very sharp end of Scotland's housing crisis. And I couldn't encourage you enough to speak to them and to hear the testaments and stories that they have about how completely crap it is for people who are suffering from our housing crisis. And don't ever let anyone tell you that it isn't a housing crisis. Mostly politicians will try and tell you that it isn't a housing crisis. Go and sit on our helpline for half an hour, or go and hang out with any of our service advisors. You will be left in no shadow of a doubt that it is a housing crisis. So we're split into services, communications and policy, which I can talk to here today, which is broadly comprised of the components you see below there. With the digital team, I would draw particular attention to. Most of my colleagues from the digital team are here today, Conrad, Keith, Tom and James. Campaigns and public affairs, which is where we turn all the information we gather from our digital resources, from our colleagues and services, from our policy insight into things to try and drive change. And we have another bit about various projects that we run at times. We also have a training arm within Shelter Scotland, which is relatively new, about trying to improve practice for practitioners and local authorities and other service providers. Just very briefly, we enjoy a really positive public profile. It's something that's very important to us, that we work very hard to maintain our trust, to maintain our standing. We are a charity. We rely on the kindness and goodwill of others to support what we do, donations from on the street, from a whole variety of other ways. So it's very important to us that we always monitor and track how well people perceive us to be doing our job. Our impact from our services side of our organisation, and this is where the stats you see around the room about the statistical situation nationally in Scotland translates into what we see on a daily basis, and these are the stats from the last year, roughly. A couple of them are wrong, which I'm sure I'll hear about later. We dealt with about 17,000 cases last year. That's people who came to our services, 17,000 cases. We don't identify them as 17,000 individuals because sometimes somebody might come once and come back, of which 12,000 came through our free national helpline. We offer that as a universal service to anyone in Scotland. If you're at a point of crisis or if you need support, our free national helpline is available to you. 46% of the calls to that helpline came from people in the private rented sector. I think that's a very important point to make because only 14% of all households in Scotland live in the private rented sector, so it is vastly disproportionate in terms of how we hear about problems from that part of Scotland's tenancy mix. Some of the other problems we deal with from the non-helpline side, which is where our casework kicks in, it's some of the more intense and time intensive cases around evictions, possessions, homelessness, debt, and struggling with household costs. Things, hopefully, that should be make sense, and there should be a logic to that. We also recently, about 18 months ago, set up what was for us at the time a very innovative form of support, which is our online chat. It's a pop-up live chat support that if you're on our website, you'll be prompted to engage with. We delivered 4,000 live chats sessions last year, and the really fantastic thing for us about that is it delivered by volunteers. And with, not that everything's about money, but what that means for us is it's an incredibly cost-effective way for us to help more people, and that's ultimately what it's all about for us. So from a communications and policy point of view, what's our impact? Because that's the other big pillar of what we do. We have about 10,000, just under 10,000 registered campaign supporters who have given us their information and support what we do. Last year we produced, researched, published and uploaded 41 policy documents or policy papers to our digital policy library. We also do the more mundane stuff of physically distributing that to key audiences and so on. We had a direct influence on 4, in particular, major bits of legislation that went through the Scottish Parliament last year on land reform, bill to put housing at the heart of when people who have come out of the community justice system and they don't have a home to go to, there's now going to be significant improvements put in place to ensure those people have a home. And most significantly of all those bills is the tenancy reform bill, and I won't go into how phenomenal that is, but it's a really big deal. Basically, if you live in the private rented sector from April next year, you'll be able to stay there as long as you want. It will be more of a home for you. You won't be able to be arbitrarily evicted unless you break some pretty obvious rules, which would make sense for you to be evicted if you were breaking them. But it brings us more in line with a lot of European countries and is a major step forward. More specifically about our digital function and the digital challenge that we have, which I thought would be interesting or appropriate for this audience, is our digital vision statement, which you could probably boil down to will help more people, and you could just put a full stop there, but it's a bit longer than that because we're a charity, and why use 5 words when you could use 100? But it really has contributed to why we're here today, that statement. We want to innovate. We want to stay ahead of the curve. We think we've got a great track record. We want to be better. We want to be as good as we possibly can be, and we know that we're never going to have all the answers. We want to hear from other people and get other people's perspectives. Some of what we do digitally, hard to display in a static slide, but I'll give it a go, and because I'm not clever enough to do it in a non-static slide. But basically, everything that we produce, as far as possible, that we do physically or we do in a more traditional sense in terms of policy or statistical analysis, we try and replicate digitally to make it as accessible as possible and to broaden our ability to have more impact. That's campaigns, the Make Renting Right campaign you can see up the top, snapshots of our social media feeds. We're trying to keep ahead of the curve on how we design the functionality of our web pages and this look and feel of our web pages to make it as easy as possible for people to engage with the content that we put a lot of time and effort into making. Hopefully you get a sense. Animations is something, that we've recently started trying to do a bit more of. Housing is an unbelievably complex field in terms of rights, responsibilities, all the issues that go with it, and we've found animation's a good way of trying to make very complex things a bit easier to engage with. Some of the key digital statistics. Last year, 834,000 unique visitors to our Get Advice pages. So Shelter Scotland, the website, has a core element called Get Advice. So a huge number of unique visitors to that page, something we're incredibly proud of, and Conrad's team have put a huge amount of effort in the last 5-6 years into making that content as engaging and as easy to sort of follow and read through as possible. Our social media channels, I think, are some of the strongest for any charity in Scotland. Keith, who's here in particular, puts a huge amount of his time into ensuring that our content's kept, hopefully, quite engaging. I think it is. I'm pretty biased. We also do an enormous amount of analysis about the trends that underlie traffic to our website, what pages people engage with most. And one of the things we pulled out for this is just we're very aware of the split in terms of access to our pages and where people are coming from, what type of devices they're using, and they need to be responsive in their design. And I think it would be fair to say that both in the public sector and the third sector, a lot of charities and information providers have really lagged behind in terms of keeping their content in as engaging a format as it can be. I wanted to just very briefly throw this up, and I was desperately looking through it earlier to try and make sure I wasn't revealing anything that shouldn't really be in the public domain. I probably haven't done that very well, but never mind. This is just to say we take quite seriously and quite a sophisticated approach to trying to plan out the proactive digital work plans that we do, and I thought that was just something worth mentioning in front of this group, because anything that may come out of this might have a relevance in terms of what we take forward, and we do take quite a serious approach to trying to manage our capacity. And this similarly just reflects that we have, we're very aware of our function in terms of a sort of a promotional platform with that level of engagement and how we coordinate that with our other communications work. I mentioned our Get Advice pages. This is primarily here how our Get Advice pages are currently structured, or a significant chunk of them are currently structured. We think the content is fantastic in terms of the detail and the factual information, and we have very positive feedback. We get about 5,000 elements of feedback annually, or at least we did last year. I don't know if it's annually exactly. Generally, it's very positive, but we are aware that it's not the most exciting way of laying out information and sort of helping people help themselves. So we've recently moved some of our content into topic hubs, as we call them, or I say we. I genuinely wouldn't have a clue how to even start doing that. But Conrad and his team have sort of, in recent months, moved sort of our thematic content into different sections, more structured around the guide format that you see there. I share all that not to go off at an endless tangent about what we're doing, but to try and give you a sense of where we currently are with some of our digital content. We like to think that we have learnt a lot of lessons. I know that we've got a great team who are well tapped into the digital world in Scotland and beyond, and we're trying to sort of make sure that we are staying ahead of the curve. But as I say, we recognise there's a very, very long way for us to always keep going. Before I go on to questions, just as a quick run through of who we are, where we are, that's a huge amount of information. It's all kind of old hat to me because I talk about it all the time. I recognise there's probably lots of things that aren't implied in there or aren't as obvious to others. I would reflect on just one or two very quick things, though, about that presentation. Across all that we do on the services side of our functionality and on the campaigns and communications side, data is the biggest problem we have. Not our data necessarily, national data in Scotland about that is in any way consistent across the 32 local authorities or at a national level. There's some key elements. There's things like quarterly homelessness statistics, there's annual publications on house building and so on, and there's some of those are represented in the stats you'll see around the room. But when you want to really help people, you need much more consistent, much more depth of local data about trends in, well, for example, there is no national or formal count on rough sleeping in Scotland. And now I'm not saying that that's where we would necessarily say you would best spend your time, effort and energy, but it's an example of big gaps in data and some of the key issues that we engage with. There's a shocking lack of consistency across local authority data in terms of the way they capture who private landlords are, how many of them are registered, how many of them aren't. Resource is a big issue, and I think one of the things that if I could put one, I don't know, beg, I suppose, to anyone, if anyone's got any interesting ideas on how we could be better or smarter at mapping data or mapping trends in some of these quite complex areas, I would be thrilled to hear anything, any insight anyone could offer on that, because we have the ability to interpret it, we have the ability to analyze it and to build on our 50 years of experience to try and understand what it tells us. What we miss so often is just the data sets to tell us what's going on the ground. So with that, I will throw it out for any questions at all that I can shed any light on, perhaps, or not. Excellent. Oh.
Should we get a mic? Is there?
I can probably shout a mic for you.
Because we've got a live stream as well, so we do need audio.
I saw that data acquisition thing on the slides very early on. What exactly do you mean by data acquisition? Who from, and how are you handling opt-in?
Thank you.
I can talk about the handling opt-in.
Yeah, sorry, in relation to what particularly, sorry?
Well, Data Protection Act, the European data regulations that came out in 2018. How are you handling asking people whether they want to give you their data, which is the first principle of data protection?
Yeah, I can talk very briefly about it, and Conrad can give you the expertise on it. It's something we have to take incredibly seriously because we're regulated as a charity by both Oscar in Scotland, by the UK body, and by European Union regulations as well. And in addition, because we're a charity that fundraises, we always try and maximise the income we can generate from supporters who might not initially be signing up to donate. They might be signing up to back a campaign or something like that. So it's something we have to take very seriously and put quite a lot of thought, time and effort into how we build that into all of our digital work and all of our campaigning work. When we capture somebody's details or their postcode or their email address, I'm going to probably get this totally wrong, but we do have all the tick boxes, and there is quite a lot of opt-in stuff.
I think you pretty much covered it. Just to say that with regards to data security, we take that really, really seriously. And one of the big projects that we're working on right now is to change everything we do and go over to SSL for everything. So that's one of the things. Double opt-ins for newsletters and so on. Easy unsubscribes. Anything that you can think of, we are on it. I think if some of you know James Baxter, he's here. He's our data security guru in terms of the Scotland representative on the whole of Shelter's board. So yeah, we take it. Malware every day. We have malware attacks, ransomware attacks, and all that sort of thing. We have a whole team looking after data and data security. So you could be assured that we're on it.
So guys, well, we need to keep the Q&A fairly brief because we've got two other speakers, and what I like doing at the end is a panel audience Q&A with the two other speakers, and I hope you're going to join that, Adam, as well. So we'll put the seats on the stage, and then we'll get all the speakers doing an additional Q&A. So I think a couple more questions. Sure. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Ask that. There you go. Well done.
For me? Ah.
Yes, you.
As an erstwhile security specialist, I'm going to ask a question that's nothing to do with security. Presumably, the people involved that you're certainly one category of people that you're attempting to reach with your digital sort of delivery mechanisms are people that are not only suffering from exclusion in all sorts of variety of social circumstances, but also digital exclusion. Do you take that into account in the design of the bandwidth demand and the endpoint resource demand of how rich the content that you deliver is?
I think, again, I can answer part of that, and I'll refer to Conrad as a specialist to answer the rest of it.
I thought you were going to sort of crowd surf.
What I would say, and I have to caveat it by saying I'll defer to the expert, but I would say that I am acutely aware about the digital divide issue. It's something I've worked on in other jobs quite a lot in my career. It's a massive problem for a country like Scotland, which has a relatively small population dispersed over a much larger geography, and some of it has really patchy provision of some real basics in terms of broadband connection or Wi-Fi and so on. We do try and factor it in. We try and do everything that we do from a campaigning and communications point of view, so it's available in multiple formats. We do, or rather, we don't have a digital by default mentality in the same way that service providers do, in that we assume that will be the dominant way. We try and do a bit of everything, so that when looking at that point through the prism of campaigning, we do quite old school things in terms of we go around all the major cities in Scotland and we book time on the high streets to get folk to physically sign up, because we're a housing and homelessness charity, and when you don't have a home, you can be reasonably sure that you probably don't have access to some of those basic amenities. And we also try and mirror all that we do on a digital capacity as well, on a digital format, to make it, going back to that point about trying to cast the net as wide as it can be, with regards to some of the technical things which are probably more relevant to you.
Just to say, we design everything we do with a mobile-first approach, so to make sure that things are they load fast on web connections. We've upgraded servers and so on to make sure that there aren't any bottlenecks over there. But the other thing, I heard a statistic the other day which was incredible, is that over half of Glasgow's population do not have internet at home. So that's we spend time with people who have internet all the time, and we walk around with smartphones and so on, but over half of Glasgow's population do not have internet at home. Yes, they access at work or in libraries, and one of the things we've done just recently is to put computers into our hubs, so if someone doesn't have internet, they can come into one of our hubs in any of Scotland's biggest cities and access the internet and fill in benefit applications and so on online, because the UK government is now assuming that everyone has internet, and there's a massive divide, and there's a massive shortage of internet access. So yeah, we're aware. Cool.
One more question.
One more question.
Very big, and then we'll move on.
So given that this is a digital weekend, what proportion of your clientele are excluded by, let's say, mobile apps?
Yeah. It's not a data point that we're tracking with people phoning the helpline and so on, and people coming into our services. So the honest answer is I don't know. So we have to then divert to what Scotland's population what is digitally excluded, because if you saw the advice visits that we get a year, that's just over 1 in 10 people in Scotland. So it's a massive amount of people are visiting our advice pages, so it's hugely important that that they can access this information. So when we are looking at creating products and services this weekend, we need to make sure that we understand that not everyone will be able to access that, and what is the fallback for those guys to be able to access it.